Thanks, Anagha. That was a very, very nice introduction. And as you were talking, the topic is understanding consent, which is the topic, and all credit to Anagha for coming up with the topic. But just as she was talking, I noticed something happening without consent, which is that we were being recorded without our consent. And Swati had to actually step out and ask the people who were recording us, please do not record us without consent. So it's just basic ethics. And today we see so much of this, that whenever there's an event going on, somebody comes in and starts recording. Kya ho raha hai, record karo. I mean, that itself is unethical, right? Because unless somebody, like when somebody is on record, they speak in a particular way, as opposed to when they are not on record, they self-censor. So whenever somebody is on record, you also have to go and say you're on record. The onus then doesn't become the onus of the person who's speaking to constantly keep self-censoring herself, thinking, oh no, CCTV camera hai. Oh no, CCTV camera hai. Oh no, record kiya ja raha hai. Right? So, yeah, I mean, just in terms of ethics, just as we were talking about consent, this too was an important factor. And thank you to Swati for stopping the recording without our consent. All right. All that being said, today the workshop is about consent. How do we understand consent? Anybody wants to give me a definition? What's consent? I was thinking we could make this interactive and just have it as a chat or something. I can pass the mic around, but we're both breathing into it.
Actually, mic से आवाज नहीं आ रही है. आप बैठ जाइए रुचिरा दी आराम से.
Okay, mic isn't working. Sorry.
No, okay. Mic is working. Just keep it close.
हाँ. और वो क्योंकि आप खड़े हैं ना तो वो सुन रहा है बात.
आप बैठ के आराम से देखिए.
Okay, I'll sit down then. I didn't want to sit here, but anyhow. Okay, so how do you all understand consent? I'm sure I'm just talking to people who already know. So somebody give me a definition of consent. I'd pass the mic around, but I've breathed into it, and it's not advisable. So go ahead.
Simply something which is done without permission or will is basically consent.
Exactly, something done without permission or will. When in 2013 and 2012, when the Nirbhaya incident happened, at that time a lot of people were running around with banners saying no means no. Do you think no means no is consent? No. Right?
Yes is consent.
Exactly. Because consent always has to be understood as enthusiastic consent. So, whenever, and you'll see this in a lot of cases of sexual harassment, somebody will say no, but then she didn't say no. But that puts the onus on the survivor to go around saying no all the time. And sometimes, maybe somebody's not in a condition to say no. Maybe there are conditions where somebody cannot say no. You can't put the onus on the survivor saying, "Kyun nahi bola? No, kyun nahi bola?" You are a bad woman that you didn't say no, or you're a bad man that you didn't say no. Bad person. How could you not say no? I mean, that's not how this works, right? So, essentially saying yes is consent. Not saying no does not necessarily mean consent. I wanted to do this, in a more enthusiastic way, because I'm sure you all get lots of lectures all the time. So I thought I would pitch a few scenarios to you, and you tell me whether it's sexual harassment or not. Is that cool? Okay. Say X and Y have been dating, right? X may be man, woman. It may be a person who does not identify as either man or woman. Similarly, Y may be man or woman, or a person who does not identify as man or woman. Okay? So X and Y have been dating for a while, and X tells Y, maybe we should have sex. And Y doesn't say anything. X starts feeling after a while that, Y is not saying anything. So they start telling Y, I'm going to break up with you if we don't have sex. Y still doesn't say anything. X then starts to take the lack of, saying anything as assent and proceeds to initiate sex. Is that sexual harassment?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely right. Why is it sexual harassment?
Because there was no consent.
There's no consent. That's kind of what it is, the idea of consent. that is basically what separates sexual harassment from a consensual act, you know. Okay, then let's do another one. Let's say X and Y meet at a party again, you know, just to clarify. And you know, the last time we did this same session, somebody said, oh, but you know, X is always a boy and Y is always a girl. So I just want to put it out at the outset that there is no such thing. X and Y could be anybody. X and Y meet at a party and they hit it off and they're attracted to one another. They find a quiet corner to make out in. Now what happens is that X has had a little bit more alcohol than Y. So Y says, do you want to go to my room? X doesn't say anything really because X has had too much to drink, but they mumble yes. So Y says okay, and they get to Y's room. And X is still saying yes. It's not that X is not saying yes. They are saying yes. And Y says, okay, this is a yes. And Y initiates sex. Is that sexual harassment or assault?
Yes.
Yes. Why?
Because X was
Being
not
drunk is not
conscious.
necessarily
Exactly. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So presence of alcohol means that you cannot consent. So therefore, it is sexual harassment, assault. It's not a consensual activity. Okay. Let's do another one. Okay, so this is a slightly you know, this happens so much in workplaces that it's almost scandalous. But you can have, let's say there are a group of students for now. It doesn't have to be students; it could be anybody. I've known teachers, I've known staff members to do such things. So it doesn't have to be students. Let's say a group of people. It could be really anybody. They gather together and they watch people walking past. And sometimes they say, okay, this person is attractive, this person is not attractive. They say it loudly, enough to make somebody else uncomfortable. One person walks by who they don't consider attractive and they mock this person. Is that sexual harassment?
Yes.
Yes, why?
Passing comments about anybody's body or sexuality as such should be seen as sexual harassment.
They would say that, you know, this is that we are not appealing, you know, we're not you know, saying that you're looking great, we're saying you're looking unattractive.
But it's still a comment about your body.
Exactly.
Absolutely right. It's still a comment about the body. It's still, and this is where it gets important, it's still creating a hostile workspace. Actually, most of sexual harassment legislation is built around the idea of, are you creating a hostile workspace? One of the major reasons why sexual harassment is a problem is because this idea of the hostile workspace. Because what happens when your workspace is hostile? Can you study? Probably not. Can you fully develop yourself to your full potential? Probably not. Can you do anything that you want to do? Certainly not, right? So that's where it goes, this idea of the hostile workspace. When people gather together and pass comments on people's bodies, then that is sexual harassment because it creates a hostile workspace.
It's really mine.
Also, I have a question.
Yeah.
Let's say there is another case, similar situation. People are passing comments on somebody else's body, but they're saying this person is attractive. But that is unsolicited. The other person, yeah, they're not calling the person ugly, but they're saying that she's very attractive. She's a 10 on 10 or a 9 on 10 or whatever. That also would count.
Is very much sexual harassment. So, you know, just because I have the mic, which I'm not using well, but anyhow, I'll just repeat what she said. The idea is that, you know, suppose you have a group of people meeting and then they pass comments on somebody walking past and they say she's attractive. It's not that they're saying she's well, it doesn't also have to be she, it could be they. They are attractive or they are unattractive, right? Would that constitute sexual harassment? Yes, because why? There's also this idea, it basically because it creates a hostile workspace. It furthers this idea that, you know, a person's worth or a person's value can be tied down to that person's physical attributes, which is creating a hostile workspace, right? It prevents people from functioning fully and developing themselves, leading the good life, you know, developing themselves to their full potential.
Also, the idea of consent. If you praise a woman or a man or a trans person when they are on a date with you or in a relationship with you per se, that is obviously not harassment. But when you talk about them while they're just walking past, it is non-consensual, therefore harassment.
Exactly. So that's exactly where consent comes in, right? Can you tell somebody that she's looking good if she's your friend or she doesn't take it badly? Yeah, right. But can you pass a comment on, or can you say you're looking good to someone you've just met? Probably not, right? So yeah, that would be part of it. And basically, consent is what defines the whole interaction. And sometimes, some people will ask, how do I know that she'll take it badly, right? Or you have to probably guess from before. You have to.
Isn't it just best to avoid if you're
It's
not
best
sure?
to avoid. Generally, it's best to avoid. If you're not sure, you should avoid. Absolutely right, Aparna. There are no parameters to judge. What do you mean? How would you know they'll feel bad? Generally, I think in general it's probably a good idea to not say somebody is looking nice until you get to know that person well enough to be able to predict. And it's also possible that the person will not behave in the way that you're predicting. So, it should be the first thing that you say,
Also,
basically.
can I reply to that? Yeah, I mean, it should also depend on the context of the situation. Like, let's say you are at a workplace and you see a new colleague, you would probably not say that. But let's say you're on Tinder, so that's another thing. That's another scenario. You're there to date someone or to find somebody.
Situation.
There it would be a different thing than at a workplace. Right? So you should also be able to judge the situation, right?
Yeah, Tinder is a different social contract. When you get on Tinder, you know that someone might swipe right on you and someone might swipe left on you, which is why I'm not on Tinder and have but I think with Tinder, with Bumble, with all of these things, you end up. It's a different social contract, right? So, you're signing up then to be judged, to be swiped left or swiped right on. But real life is not Tinder, right? And real life should not be Tinder, because if real life were Tinder, then it would be a very hostile space, and it would also become very difficult to get anything done.
It would be like passing comments on people, randomly passing.
Which is actually where Tinder came from, right? Tinder actually developed from this very toxic world of people looking at constantly evaluating one another, sometimes even ascribing objective criterion to them, like 10 on 10, 5 on 10 and all kinds of nonsense. But that's Tinder itself is a product of a hostile workspace, but people are still then creating institutions and creating a social contract where people put themselves up to be judged on those criteria in the hope that they will find a partner, at least for some time, so people are contracting to put themselves in that situation.
There is consent, especially in Tinder, because these lines are extremely blurry in these cases. There is consent as much as you say that, okay, you can judge me on XYZ photos of mine. But then that does not, Tinder also doesn't mean consent to say sex or consent to...
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
you can still have sexual harassment within these
Within
spaces.
Tinder, yeah, because you might consent to being judged on your photos, absolutely right, but you might not consent to necessarily having sex or doing things that you are not completely comfortable with. There was a question in the back there.
Yeah, so when we are talking about everything here, basically, the distinction between implicit and explicit. So, if you're talking about, okay, we cannot comment on looks, but there is an implicit judgment which also comes from where we are situated. So, the society and everything else. So, the implicit judgment is not, so you understand the whole dynamics and you will not comment, but you're still judging. And that's where, I mean, so you might not go on Tinder, but you're still the people you'll hang out with, the people you'll go along with. That's also that we need to talk about.
Yeah, but then we're talking sexual harassment, right? And the question then becomes, like, what is creating a hostile workspace? The legislation is not developed such that everybody will be validated in society. That's not what the legislation is trying to do, because that is too big a goal to achieve with just legislation or with institutions or with, you know, our small bodies. Rather, what the rules are trying to do is to create a workspace where everybody can, you know, lead the good life, essentially, where everybody can prosper, everybody can perform, work, you know, basically live. So if you know, when you're commenting on someone's body explicitly, then that creates a hostile workspace. Implicitly, you know, then you'll still have discrimination, for instance, and there have to be other ways to, you know, deal with those. But yeah, that would not come under sexual harassment per se, right? As long as you don't make somebody uncomfortable, that's the idea. Yeah, so let's do some others, and then we will, you know, start talking laws and regulations and things. I just wanted to talk about a couple of instances, you know, when you're talking, like say I'm told this is happening in DJ nights where people get together and start passing comments on people who are coming and going. You know, there was one very premier college which was once a boys' college and then it became co-ed. And as soon as it became co-ed, it started publishing these lists. It used to be called a chick list, where they would, you know, make a list of the 10 who they considered, whatever the people who made the list considered the 10 supposedly best looking or most desirable women. And why do you think they developed a list like this? The idea basically was not just to, you know, rate their, I mean, the act of rating their colleagues was of course violent, but part of it was also in a way reminding their female colleagues that they don't belong in that space, that it was a male dominated space and their female colleagues do not belong there. And if they belong there, then their purpose becomes for viewing or for other kinds of pleasure to their male colleagues, rather than, you know, just existence on their own terms, right? So and you know, you always notice these lists coming out when this boys' college became co-ed. It was a way of telling their female colleagues that you are not welcome here, right? So that is what I mean by this rating system and how it creates a hostile workspace, right? Okay, scenario 4. So X is walking around campus and Y says, here, look at some pictures. Those pictures could be sexually colored, and X says, I don't want to look at those pictures. Y says, no, please see. Is that sexual harassment? Yes, absolutely right. Similarly, and you know, we can take this to the digital space. X has certain photos and constantly keeps tagging Y on those photos, right? Forcing Y to see them because those pictures are arriving in her mailbox and in their mailbox, in their feed and so on. Would that be sexual harassment? Yes. Exactly. And then the onus, like, and that has to, and you know, that comes down to the design of our digital platforms as well. Right now the onus is on survivors to say, I don't want to be tagged on photos. Rather, and that would be photos in general. And the onus is not on trying to prevent X from, you know, tagging Y on photos. Right? And that also tells you a little bit about how the design of various social media platforms is not particularly gender sensitive. Yeah. Okay, it's quite interesting because the digital space is often a kind of a mirror of very toxic real life spaces, right? And that's why digital spaces also become toxic by that same logic since we started talking Tinder. Okay, another one. X approaches Y, compliments them saying, you know, how well fitting their particular outfit is. Is that sexual harassment? Yes, absolutely. If Y does not want to be complimented, and in most cases Y will not want to be complimented in a workspace on how well their clothes fit them, then that is certainly sexual harassment. Okay, last one, and then after that I will let you all, I will stop bombarding you with scenarios. Last one says, X is cracking lewd jokes about people. It might not be a lewd joke about Y per se, but about other people. And Y complains and says, this is making me very uncomfortable. And X says, why? Firstly, I'm not talking about you. Secondly, freedom of speech. I'm in a public space and I have freedom of speech and I can say whatever I want. Is that sexual harassment?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's
Because
again
freedom of speech is not absolute.
the workspace becomes
Hostile, exactly. So, and then comes this question about sexual harassment versus freedom of speech, right? Or the idea of censorship of content. To what extent, freedom of speech is obviously a thing and should be respected and should be protected. But to what extent, can you have freedom of speech that is, causing a hostile workspace for someone else and preventing the other person from being able to function? Clearly not, right? But you do see a lot of that. Like, say, there was one instance where one student posted a story using an institutional platform of how, of a particular interaction that this student had with some woman, and it was an interaction where that woman had no agency, and he said it's just a story, and he said, I have freedom of speech. Who are you to stop me from posting a story about a fictional character who has no agency? Doesn't matter. It's on the handle of a student council, and that will create a toxic work environment. Still, even then, though you have freedom of speech and though we do not want to censor student bodies, even then one cannot on a student body on a student handle, like the handle, Instagram handle of a student organization, you cannot then have a hostile workspace for other people. Okay, so I guess this was great. It's always good to do these. But let's talk a little bit about what is sexual harassment then. So, any thoughts? What is sexual harassment? I'm preaching to the flock. I'm preaching to the choir. Okay, you are all converted. Okay, so I'll just define it straight out of regulations, out of the rule book. Any unwanted conduct which is gendered. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be an act of sexual violence per se, but acts of violence which are also gendered in their nature will also come under this definition because they are creating hostile workspaces. So any unwanted conduct that is gendered or sexual can come under the umbrella of sexual harassment. To the extent, okay, let's do a scenario 7. Like, suppose somebody starts spreading rumors about X student, saying X student is sexually promiscuous or whatever. Would that come under sexual harassment? Yes, absolutely. Because it's unwanted, because it's gendered, and of course it is still violence, right? So,
what about confession pages?
Confessions pages, nice. What are your thoughts on confessions pages?
I think they
Has been
are.
having a lot of confession pages.
Yes, yes.
This was going on from my time. From 2012, there were confessions pages, and usually under the garb of anonymity, people started even saying that particular professors and commenting on the physical attributes of their professors even. So this kept on happening, and that's wrong. I mean, should I say you shouldn't have a confessions page?
Yes.
Maybe not, or
I mean,
somebody would have to moderate it.
Depends on who moderates it, and that it gets very murky. That I think it is
Then
better
who,
not
who
to have
moderates
one.
the moderator?
Yeah.
Who decides who the moderator is? Also gets, generally anonymous pages, I've not had good relations or good interactions with them. The internet is a very, very toxic, messed up place. And the internet world starts to impact our real world. So for instance, on a confessions page, if somebody comments on somebody's physical attributes or comments on somebody's sexual behavior, then that will start having real life consequences in their work environments. So it's not harmless just because it's digital, right? Then the question is, who moderates? Is the moderator, if you can't even democratically elect a moderator, the moderator is anonymous.
And usually they're like, I get these stories, I post it out. It's freedom, very false sense of everybody has the right to say. But usually what we see is, because we live in a particular kind of society, it's just men under the garb of, mostly, I'm not saying all of them, under the garb of anonymity, making lewd remarks on women, be it their friends or faculties also sometimes. And usually the moderator themselves is also many a times not female, so they don't understand at some level, because of lived experiences of how one faces sexual harassment, they don't understand what the real life consequences of talking about people like this is.
Absolutely right. This would. पीछे से कितना पीछे से? How that पीछे से? Oh, okay. थोड़ा सा जोर से. Okay, what? Oh yeah, that's right. You want to take this the and take it back? No. कर भी सकते, but it seems like a pain. How bad? Like how much? How badly would you all live?
Like a problem.
Okay. You want to move ahead because I'm not wearing a mask and I'm afraid of.
okay.
Yeah. Okay, then just come up, I guess. Yeah, I've always had a voice problem throughout my life. Could not give a proper nara to save my life. It's still bad, and I usually have to do closed rooms with good acoustics. But it's okay. It happens. Yeah. Is this any better for you all at the back? Yeah. Anything you want me to repeat? No?
Yes, what Aparna was telling, we couldn't hear that.
Okay, Aparna, go. Aparna has a voice and can give naras.
What was I saying regarding
JNU
confession pages? Yeah, I was saying that confession pages are usually, many a times they're run by heterosexual men. The moderators are heterosexual men. And in the name of freedom of speech, whatever confession they come, they just post it anonymously on that page without quite realizing what the real world consequences of a page, and these pages become quite popular, saying that she likes to sleep around, as if if she wants to sleep around, that's up to her. And but then judgments come in other ways from society. So you can have a question of whether should confession pages exist or not, but from the way they have turned out to be, it's better to avoid them, because in the end, most people who are at the receiving end are women and people of gender minority.
Absolutely, and this is true of not only just the JNU Confessions page, but we all remember the famous episode of the boys' locker room. What is it? BOIS? I never understood why they spell it like that, but anyway, and that's hardly the most objectionable thing about it. So there's the boys' locker room, which made lives of several women absolutely unbearable. And you still have the moderators roaming around, scot-free, people of privilege. Nobody bothered to to hold them accountable for what they did to the lives of several young women. At the same time, you also have anonymous persons auctioning the bodies of certain women, and usually women of a particular minority group, on these platforms. And that is absolutely, that is wrong, and that should be a crime. Boys' locker room, what happened there was a crime. Even several of these confessions pages, if they don't moderate this kind of content, then it should be a crime. It's basically cybercrime.
I'm also asking how I mean, to what extent can you moderate it? At least it would contain at least the name of somebody and some unsolicited remark that I like this person or whatever, and that person may be uncomfortable reading that on a public platform because that person knows everybody is going to read that.
You'll have to moderate it basically.
But to
It
what-
all boils down to consent, right?
Criminal cases, if at all you want to bring it, it should be that should fall upon the moderator, so that the next time someone decides to moderate such a page, they will know what kind of content. Because you when you're moderating a page, everything on that page should be your responsibility.
Yeah, but
That's
I'm
the
asking
job of the moderator,
to what
no?
extent can you moderate? Meaning, even if it's, I mean, the least that you can do is, the least harmful remark also would be that this person is attractive, and this can also be uncomfortable to
Problematic,
someone.
uncomfortable,
So how is the
toxic.
moderator going to know that this person is not going to take it in a?
Well, if you know, I think in general one can assume or one can expect that talking about someone's desirability, sexual desirability on a public platform is uncomfortable
That is
and
what
will
most
impact.
confession pages are then.
Yeah.
Then should there be a question on the existence of confession pages?
Aparna says yes.
Yes,
I mean, I say that, if you just moderate out all that kind of, I like so and so is sexually desirable kind of content, and confessions start to revolve around, I woke up this morning and I felt like having a samosa. Now that thing is fine. Or I really, really like pizza. I don't know. I mean, well, nobody would post that on a confessions page. So, but there are some handles called Overheard in Delhi, which is quite, which is quite creative.
Yeah.
It goes on to, it makes fun of, particular types like, it does make some stereotypical assumptions about Delhi aunties and so on. But
then it does
it doesn't explicitly target one particular individual, so it doesn't then create a toxic work environment, and the content is relatively enjoyable to some people, so it could pass. So basically you then just ask, that's why consent, right? Are you violating consent by saying that South Delhi rich people like pizza? Probably not, right? But are you violating consent when you say X is hot? Yes. Right. So that's what I mean. Right. Yeah. Wow. I didn't think I would be talking so much about the digital space, but this is our reality today. Okay. So yeah, what happens to sexual harassment? If it occurs, if it persists, it can create a very hostile work environment, and it can become very difficult for groups of people or even one particular individual to sustain her life or sustain their lives. And and in fact it remains still true. I don't know if there's a dubious JNU has the dubious distinction that survivors who have filed complaints of sexual harassment have not stayed on to study as much as they wanted to. Either they waited till their program ended and left, or they left midway. So a good part of JNU's dropout rate would actually be because of sexual harassment. I can't give you an exact percentage terms, but I shouldn't have to. That itself is, most survivors of sexual harassment in JNU have left the university. They have not stayed to complete their PhD. They have not stayed to sometimes even finish their MAs or their MPhils, and that is extremely problematic. And this is somewhere where even our society has failed, right? So this is what I mean by hostile workspace. Somebody wants to study, somebody wants to work but can't because of sexual harassment. Now that is a very, very toxic, very hostile workspace. So it will coerce individuals into particular problematic positions, particular positions that are harmful to them. And that is why we have to address it as an immediate problem, right? It can range from anything. It can range from physical abuse, it can range to verbal abuse, it can relate to digital platforms or what is said about people on digital platforms. And examples are suggestive remarks, remarks about appearance, offensive comments, remarks about a person's sex life, displaying sexually offensive material, physical, electronic, doesn't matter, intimidation or blackmail for sexual favors, very, very much. And often you will hear that this person consented, or you'll often see this in intimate partner relationships. This person has consented because this person is in a relationship with me. Well, that still doesn't mean you can be emotionally abusive. That still doesn't mean that you can gaslight someone, make someone think something is true when it is not true. So even, Aisha Kidwai used to say we have to change the way in which we love, right? Love too has to observe the boundaries of consent. Threats about someone, that kind of thing. So I am going on and on. I believe there have been some cases of stalking in JNU. A lot of cases. Now that is absolutely terrifying. If you're talking hostile workspace, stalking creates the most terrifying workspace imaginable. And if you start seeing a high dropout rate amongst one section of the population because of stalking, then that's your stock example of a hostile workspace. Okay, so what can we do about sexual harassment? There have been a number of things that even happened since 2013. So after the Nirbhaya incident, the UGC had a new regulation which basically governs most ICCs, and that is also why we had to lose our GSCASH almost on some kind of a technicality, even though our GSCASH was in a way a model for many other kinds of internal complaints committees. But here, this regulation act, it's called the Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal of Sexual Harassment of Employees and Students in Higher Education Institutions. The first thing that any regulation against sexual harassment does is that it defines who a student is. A student is anybody who is enrolled in a program at the university. It can be distance learning, it can be online, it can be offline, of course. Doesn't matter. If you're enrolled in a program, you're a student. It also defines the university as a workplace. Now, it's a workplace not just for employees who are there, faculty and staff and so on, but it's also a workplace for students. Those students are not actually doing wage work in the university. They are still investing in their future, right? So thereby it's a workplace for students as well. And usually the idea, this, question of what a workspace is can get quite tricky. What if an episode of sexual harassment occurs off campus? What then? Right? A lot of ICCs have actually said this is not sexual harassment, we can't do anything because these two students or these people were off campus at the time it happened. So usually the UGC regulation actually defines a workplace as any place where learning can occur, or where the learning process is occurring. So that will include, your field trips, it will include when you are on field work, it will include, whatever it is that you go on to do. It might, however, still not include a situation where, two people who belong to a university are at a party somewhere else where no learning is happening or no learning conceivably is happening. And that's problematic. Ideally, like under GSCASH, the rule used to be any place where the workplace hierarchy is there or where the workplace relationship is there. But the UGC regulation doesn't mandate that. It says any place where the learning process can occur. Even under the UGC regulation, the idea is that, a best practice is to actually use the workplace hierarchy definition rather than the learning process definition. But I've actually seen judgments where, which have said this is not sexual harassment because it didn't happen on campus. So, and that's not how ICCs should operate. Right? The process is supposed to be time bound, it should take 3 months, but we know that this does not often happen in practice, rather it keeps getting extended. Also, the process is quite onerous because everything has to be transcribed, everything has to be written down. So, and often, these bodies don't even have the kind of support that they need in terms of transcription services. But now, of course, I think with technology things have gotten a little bit better, but not necessarily so. Now, then comes this very problematic thing called the process of conciliation. UGC mandates it. It says that you can have conciliation. It can be a step in the process. And for a long time, when the Saksham Committee regulations were coming out, we were all protesting against it. Sorry, I'm trying to shout over that, but I'm not succeeding. But anyhow, we were protesting against it, this idea of conciliation, because we also thought that then the bodies will become like mediation bodies, saying acha, take back your complaint, everything will be fine, kind of bodies that would basically just quash the complaint. However, survivors often do request conciliation. Often survivors don't want to go through the entire process, and they're looking for redressal just in terms of, in a conciliation setting which is mediated by the ICC. So now bodies are allowing for conciliation, but even now a best practice is not to insist on conciliation or to force conciliation on the survivor, but go for conciliation if the survivor asks for it. Okay, so that's a change in the regulation which has happened since 2013, and GSCASH never had any conciliation in its bylaws, but today many ICCs actually do have conciliation. And yeah,
like, how do you ensure that the person who is asking for the conciliation is asking out of his or her own will and not due to some pressure because of the hierarchy?
Absolutely, and that was also one major reason why we were all protesting against this conciliation clause. But today, this has become a reality because of this UGC Act. So, your institution has the ability to create this ICC. One day there will be another GSCASH, and then it will be GSCASH 2.0. It will never be GSCASH 1.0. So then you would have to, work around how often will the GSCASH recommend conciliation? Under what grounds will the GSCASH recommend conciliation? It depends on the people who you vote into the GSCASH, right? And also, you'll have to protect the ability of students to constantly be in the inquiry committees. That would be part of activism, and part of activism both on part of students and faculty. And it would also be, you would have to create those best practices, that when can you take the request for conciliation as coming from, the survivor themselves or coming from external pressures. One way is to ask the question, so you're asking for conciliation, is this because of any external pressures on you, right? Maybe that person won't say, but then you can go on trying to find out. You can ask counselors to sit in the inquiry committee and, try to find out or try to counsel survivors who are usually going through a lot of, mental health anxiety and pressures themselves. So there's also the question of how to talk to survivors. It's not easy. The work of an ICC is actually one of the hardest things to do in any university, and it takes special training, and it takes a good deal of activism just to keep it together, make sure that it adheres to the right best practices, to constantly keep talking about what these best practices are and what we can learn from other institutions as well, right? And then there is this often, what else can you get? You can get an interim order. So like an interim kind of solution. So you can get a stay, you can get a restraining order if somebody is trying to stalk you. You can ask for somebody who's stalking you to be out of bounds, right? So there are things you can do even, while the case is continuing, to be able to create a safe space for survivors. There should be provisions for appeal because nothing is sacrosanct. Even ICCs are not sacrosanct, so there should always be a democratic process of appeal. And confidentiality, well, when I was in the first ICC that I was ever part of, the idea was to protect the confidentiality of the survivor and not the confidentiality of the respondent. But today, a lot of those things have also changed, and the kind of cases that we are getting, the nature of these cases have also changed. The digital landscape has created many kinds of tensions and many new kinds of cases, many new kinds of problems. So today we are expected to also protect confidentiality, not just of of survivors, but also of respondents. So yeah, I can.
Is that applicable even if the respondent is proven to be a perpetrator of the crime?
I think after the report comes out and the case is no longer sub judice, then that's no longer applicable per se.
But for the survivor, it's still applicable.
For the survivor, it's still applicable. In general, it's good practice in discourse to not name survivors, even if respondents are named. Yeah, that's basically it. I can take any questions, and you're all getting itchy because of mosquito bites. So yeah, we can also, I guess, close.